Okay, we're back for chapter 5, languages, Mr. Hillstrom and I. When you see these little things that we have in there for you, they're fun to watch. A TED Talk. Remember we said back on population, make sure you check out that one on population pyramids. So here we go, okay? Alrighty, so we're going to talk about languages, and once again, you got to think about region, you got to think about space, you got to think about large scale, small scale, and we'll talk about that here, all right? Where are the world's languages distributed? We're going to talk about the original language families, about colonialism, about military exploits, but most recently the internet, and that's why English is dominant, a lot of those reasons, and we're going to cover that today. Where did English and related languages originate and diffuse? We're going to do those trees, and we're part of the Indo-European family, and we're part of that Germanic branch. And we'll talk about the whole history of how our language evolved. Why do individual languages vary amongst places? Could be isolation, all right? Could be neighbors around them. We'll get into that. And why do local languages survive? It's got to be a lot about pride. We'll go to the big ones right now. See how many I can name. Hebrew is being saved by the Jewish people in Israel. All right, they're educating their kids with it. We see Gaelic is making a strong comeback in Ireland and Scotland and Wales because they're teaching it in the schools. And then Native American tribes are keeping it because now they're teaching it in their schools, which they finally have schools because of the casino money. And we'll talk a lot about that. Uh-oh, that's not good. I don't like that. Okay. I'm not going to steal Mr. Hillstrom's thunder on these because these are the next 3 slides after this. And we'll talk a lot about our migration and how languages have just come with migrants. And I've pretty much said all of this, okay? So Mr. Hillstrom's ready to go.
All right, so language moves with speakers, so relocation, diffusion. As people move, they bring their language with them, and then it diffuses that way. Different types of language, institutional language. This is the language we want you to use on the AP test. So this is the type of language you'll hear people use on the news, you'll hear people use it in business, and it's kind of more formal. Developing languages are languages that aren't as widely dispersed, but they have a literary tradition. I think of like Urdu in Lodi. We have a Pakistani population, so it's spoken quite a bit, but it's usually by a minority group. Maybe something like Cambodian in Stockton. A vigorous language is very similar to developing, except that it has a written. It doesn't have a written component to it. Okay. So think of, for example, Native Americans who pass down their language orally instead of having a written form. All right, and then Mr. Wright mentioned the families, the branches, and the groups, just how we organize language, and I'll let him talk more about that later. So this is an example, is showing us an example of how language spreads via migration. So that Madagascar, the Philippines, and Indonesia, they all descend from the Austronesian language family. So they have the same sort of family, but they all sound very different. So between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago, people set sail and they sailed about 2,000 or 3,000 miles to come to Madagascar. Well, they populated the place and they separated from wherever it was that they sailed, and that language developed in isolation. And so that's why it sounds so different from they're from the same family, but they sound very, very different. Okay, this one's talking about writing systems or literary traditions. That's the word Wikipedia in multiple languages. Our literary tradition comes from our holy book, the Bible. So you'll see a lot of themes in our literary traditions, like light and dark. The Chronicles of Narnia that your parents read to you. You had there's a lot of light and a lot of dark in those kinds of stories. Harry Potter, same kind of thing. If you lived over here, if you lived in India, it would be based on the Vedic tradition, the Vedas. So the Hindu sacred texts and things like that. All right.
Come up with the trees?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, it's hard for me to read all of these. Oh, actually, this is not too bad, okay? All right, so we're talking about language families, and English is over here in the Indo-European, and oh boy, Mr. Ostrom, can you slide over here to the map here?
Yeah.
All right, and what they mean by Indo-European was our language family started here, and as people migrate, either as farmers or warriors, they're going to take the language this way, and as they migrate here, they're going to take the language this way, so that's the Indo-European, but our language families begin here in Southwest Asia. All right, and linguists have traced back 12 common words in all of our languages that have been offshoots. So they feel very strongly that at one time we were all one language. And then you can see here off of this Indo-European family, we're over here in the Germanic group. Let's see, that's Romance. Here's Germanic, West Germanic, and there's North Germanic with the Danes and the Swedes and whatnot. But English is over here, and it's pretty big because English has spread with colonizing and with the internet, but our roots are in Germanic. The other big language family is Sino-Tibetan, and it's so big because in China they speak Mandarin, and that's the largest one. And then you've got some smaller ones, Niger-Congo here in sub-Saharan Africa. Over here you've got, I can't read that, so I'm gonna look. It's called Austric. You've got the Austronesian and Austroasiatic. And then what's interesting is over here in this Indo-European is Afroasiatic, which you get over into the Southwest Asia. You get some different ones there. And you can see that's why it would come from our Indo-European because of Southwest Asia. So make sure you look at this tree and understand the difference between a family, a branch, and then a specific language, and see how we're related to the other ones. Okay, keep doing that. Don't know what it means. All right, I'm not too much quite sure what to make of this slide. It talks about diversity of sounds in local languages, and here, more and there less. People have traded with each other, and people have shared words with each other, whereas in sub-Saharan Africa, you'll see more isolated language groups because people didn't move as much. That's the only thing I can think of. But the more that I'm reading about Africa right now, this region was just so into trade, and I'm excited when we do the religion unit because I've been reading a lot about this area. But I think that's what that slide would mean if you saw, got something like this, and what are they saying? Well, this is more diverse. Okay, they traded a lot more. This is less diverse. They didn't trade as much. They didn't have as much interaction. Okay, all right. And then here, the Indo-European languages, because of the colonizers spreading out through North America, South America, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, India, you can see that the Indo-European languages, well, it was already in India, but English came. And then Sino-Tibetan, Chinese is the biggest influence there, but that's why it's so big. And then you can see the other ones there. But Indo-European, huge. Have I got one more, or are you up? You're up, okay.
All right, so a lot of this Mr. Wright went over again. The Indo-European language, nearly half of the world's population speaks a language that descended from that family, that large trunk of Indo-European. And then you can see it includes things like Indo-Iranian, Germanic, Romance languages, all very different sounding because over time you have different features, physical features that might separate people, and they start to develop different languages. The second largest is the Sino-Tibetan, and that's the Mandarin is the majority of that family. So 94% of the people in China are Han Chinese, and they speak Mandarin. And so they tend to steamroll other smaller minority languages. Okay, so this is cool. We get to see the distribution of the language families, and like we talked about, there's Mandarin over here. It's pretty much based in China. China was the greatest civilization in the world until about 1492, when they decided to close their borders off and not trade with the outside world. And that was a mistake. They started to become a second-rate country. Instead of being a colonizing country, they became a country that was largely colonized. And so
about China?
I'm talking about China.
China, 1421.
Yes, 1421.
1421,
Okay.
yeah.
So Columbus sailed the ocean blue in
92.
1492. That's where I was thinking. So before Columbus sailed, all right, they had to deal with the Opium Wars, right? And that was not a good thing for them. They got colonized. So Indo-European, you can see various types of languages spreading, like Mr. Wright was saying, coming up here, moving to the west and north, okay, and then also moving back down to the east, southeast. And let's see, these languages are spreading because of conquest and because of colonization primarily, okay? So if you see Arabic here, you know that's the primary language of the Quran. And so about 1200, when the Muslims were spreading across, we're spreading across North Africa and Southwest Asia. There we go. They were bringing their language with them, and part of the written tradition in Islam is knowing Arabic. Okay. All right, and then you see some smaller ones over here, and different types of language. So indigenous peoples and indigenous families. Okay. Let's see. Do I have this one too?
Yeah, branches of Indo-European.
Okay. So all right. So I think the main one I was going to talk about were the Romance languages, but we're going to get to that again later on. This one's just talking about, Germanic is a branch. So that large trunk is a family. Over time, it branches off, and you start to see Germanic type languages develop. You also start to see the Romance languages develop. So the Romance languages, there were all these smaller tribes sort of separated by mountain ranges and things like that. And then they were sort of unified underneath the Roman Empire. They all had that common Latin as a base for their written language. And so you start to hear a lot of similarities between those languages, but that would be like a specific type of branch. So you hear kind of like similarities. So if you think of counting, right? You think in French it's un, deux, trois, or in Spanish, uno, dos, tres, or Italian, un, due, and it's
Couldn't tell you.
un, due, and tre, I believe. Okay.
Shelly's got to help us.
Yeah, Chelly knows. Ask Chelly. Okay. I think it's tre though. Okay, so all of those is very similar, but still slightly different just because of space, because of physical geography, intervening obstacles. All right, you're up, Mr. Wright. Okay.
All right, so basically on the AP test, you're going to need to know the big difference about Arabic being spoken in the north, and it's Afro-Asiatic. That won't be so as important. What's important is it's Arabic up here because that's where the Muslim traders were going, or the Arab traders. And not only did they spread their religion, but they spread their language all through here. And then down here, the big one is going to be Niger-Congo, all right? And there, if you guys read They Poured Fire on Us from the Sky for extra credit, remember that the young boys were running, and as they went to, 10 miles to the next village, they knew what was going on. The language was very similar, but the farther away they ran, then they can only pick up on a few words. And then as they got even farther, then they didn't know what was going on. Well, they had run into a whole new language family area, or a language, language family. All right, so the big ones on the test are going to be Arabic up north and Niger-Congo down here. And then you can see this was really influenced by all of that, Afro-Asiatic, the guys in the big canoes going from island to island.